Lakota chief stood trial before his own council. A white widow spoke beside him and was wed. The fire had been burning since before first light, and I could tell by the color of the smoke that Red Crow had stacked the wood himself. He always used green cottonwood when he wanted a thing to feel important. The smoke came up gray and heavy, and you could smell it from the horse lines, which was where I was standing when Two Winds came to find me. He didn't say anything at first, just walked up and stood beside me with his arms crossed the way a man does when the news he's carrying is too much to hold in one hand. I watched him for a moment. He was younger than me by 15 years, and he had the kind of face that showed everything. My face didn't show much anymore. That was either wisdom or damage. I'd stopped trying to figure out which. "They've called the council," he said. I nodded. I'd been expecting it. Red Crow and Humpback Elk, and the three from the river band. I nodded again. "Charging Fox," he said and stopped. That one I had not been expecting. Charging Fox was my sister's son. He was 22 years old and he could ride better than anyone I had ever watched ride. He had sat beside me at 3 councils in the last 4 years, and I had watched him learn to be still and to listen, which is something most young men never learn. I had loved him the way you love a thing that holds the future in it. Two Winds was watching me to see what my face would do. My face did nothing. "When?" I said. "Midday. At Red Crow's fire." I looked back at the horse lines. My gray mare was watching me with those eyes she had, patient and old. I had taken her from a Crow raider 8 years back, and in the way of things she had become mine in a way that very few things become yours, not by transaction but by time. I thought about saddling her and riding. Not far, not away. Just into the grass for a while, where nothing was required of me. But you don't get to do that when you're the one they're coming for. "Tell Red Crow I'll be there," I said. My name is Tall Cedar, and I had been chief of my band for 11 years. I want to say that plainly because the word chief is a word that white men use, and it doesn't mean the same thing to us that it means to them. To them it means a man who gives orders and other men obey. To us, it means the man who has to figure out what is right, and then hold to it when everyone else loses their nerve. There are easier jobs. There are jobs that don't make your enemies among your own people. I had made enemies. 3 seasons before, I had met with the white commander who was building the road through the Eastern Valley. I did not want the road. None of us wanted the road. But I sat down with the man and I listened to what he said, and what he said was this: the road was coming regardless of what I wanted. What he was asking me to decide was whether we would lose men fighting a thing we could not stop, or whether we would move the band 12 miles northwest and keep the hunting ground on the ridge and live. I sat with that for 4 days. I talked to the old men, and I talked to the young men, and I talked to the women, because in my experience the women are usually thinking about what is real while the men are thinking about what is honorable, and sometimes what is real and what is honorable are not the same thing. My wife was still living then. Her name was Morning Star Woman, and she said to me on the 3rd night, "You know what you have to do, and you're waiting for someone to give you permission. No one is going to give you permission. That's why you're the one they call when it's hard." She was right. She was usually right. I took the band 12 miles northwest. We didn't lose a man. The hunting ground on the ridge held through 2 winters. The road went through the valley, and we barely saw it. But Charging Fox's father, my sister's husband, a man named Breaks the Ice, had died 2 years before that meeting, in a fight with soldiers near the river. And Charging Fox had never forgiven me for not fighting. He was 15 when his father died. He was 15 and he saw me sit across from a white soldier and talk, and in his mind that was the same as surrender, and no amount of ground held or lives saved was ever going to change the shape of that in him. I understood it. I had been 15 once. I had had a father once. If I had died and someone had chosen peace over revenge, I think I might have felt the same way. Understanding a thing and being able to stop it are 2 different things. The woman had come into our camp 7 weeks before the council. I should say that plainly too, because what came later is tangled up with who she was and what she meant, and I don't want anyone hearing this and thinking she appeared like a sign or a blessing or something from a story. She appeared on a gray horse with a lame left foreleg, and a rifle she clearly didn't know how to use, and a canvas pack that held about 4 days of food. She appeared because she was lost. Her name was Me Doyle. I learned that later. When Two Winds brought her to me, she hadn't offered it yet. She was wary the way a cornered animal is wary, all stillness and watching, not hostile but not trusting either. She was maybe 35, maybe a little less. She had dark hair and light eyes, and her hands were cracked from cold because she wasn't dressed right for the weather we'd been having. She'd come from somewhere to the southeast. She told me later it was a settlement called Harker's Mill, which I'd heard of, 3 days east of the river Bend. Her husband had died 4 months before. Fever. They'd had a small piece of land, and the land was mortgaged, and with him gone the mortgage came due, and there was nothing to do but leave. She'd had an idea about going to her brother's place, 140 miles northwest. She had a rough direction and not much else. She was 60 miles from where she needed to be. She had missed the trail somewhere along the creek and gone south when she should have gone north, and the lame horse was the least of her problems. I looked at her for a while. I looked at the horse and the rifle and the canvas pack. "You know how to use that," I said in English, which I spoke well enough. She looked at the rifle. She almost smiled. "I know which end to point," she said. I told Two Winds to see to the horse. I told the woman she could stay until the horse was sound and we could set her on the right trail. She nodded, and that was it. No thanks, which I respected. No questions, which I also respected. She had the self-possession of a woman who'd been carrying everything herself for a while and had gotten used to the weight. She slept in the lodge of a widow woman named Spotted Owl, who was 70 years old and deeply curious about white women, and questioned Me Doyle for 3 days straight through sign language, and the handful of English words Spotted Owl had collected over the years. Me bore this with patience and gave as good as she got, asking things back through the same rough channel. And by the end of the 3rd day, the two of them were communicating in some system that I couldn't entirely follow. I noticed her the way you notice a change in the weather, not because she was a white woman in a Lakota camp, though she was, not because she was alone and recent widowed and doing something that required more nerve than most people had. Those things were true, but they weren't why I noticed her. I noticed her because she watched the same way I watched, like she was trying to understand how things worked rather than waiting for them to happen to her. The council fire was built in a clearing east of the main camp, and when I arrived the 5 men were already seated. Red Crow was on the north side, Humpback Elk beside him. The 3 from the river band, brothers, all of them, heavyset and slow to decide, were on the west. Charging Fox was to the south, and he sat with his knees drawn up and his eyes fixed somewhere above my head, the way young men sit when they've made up their mind and are afraid to look at the person they've made it up against. I sat across from them. There was protocol for this. There was always protocol, pipes and words and the correct silences. I did all of it. I sat straight and I waited and I watched the smoke from that green cottonwood go up into the sky, which was the color of old pewter. It was going to snow before night. I could feel it in the air, that particular cold that is different from ordinary cold, heavier somehow, like a held breath. Red Crow spoke first. He had been a war leader once, 20 years ago, and he still carried himself like one, big through the chest, deliberate in every movement. He was not my enemy. He was a man who disagreed with me about something that mattered, which is a different thing, and I want to be careful about that distinction because it matters to how I tell what happened. What he said was this, that I had chosen the safety of the band over the dignity of the band, and that a chief who could not be trusted to fight when fighting was required could not be trusted to decide when not to fight because one required the other. He said this was not about the road. He said the road had been the beginning of a question that kept being asked. What was I willing to do? And the answer kept being, less than a chief should be willing. Humpback Elk said nothing. He was there to witness. That was its own statement. The brothers from the river band said variations of what Red Crow had said. One of them said my name was a name people used when they talked about the long yielding, and that he did not want his sons to use my name that way. I listened to all of it. I kept my face at rest. Inside I was holding a rope above a long drop, but my face showed none of that. Then Charging Fox spoke. He was looking at me now. He had gotten past whatever fear he'd had and come out the other side of it, into that place where feeling burns away and what's left is cold and certain. I recognized that place. I had been there myself. He said his father had died for a people who would not die for themselves. He said he had watched me for 6 years, and every time there was a choice between honor and survival, I chose survival and dressed it up as wisdom. And he was tired of watching that happen, and he was asking the council to name a new chief before we lost everything that made us worth being. When he was done, it was quiet except for the fire. I sat with it for a while. The cold was coming in harder now. I could see frost on the dry grass at the edge of the clearing. I was going to speak. I had things to say, true things, things I had thought about for a long time and believed down in the place where a man's actual self lives, below the performance of it. I was going to say that the dead don't hold ground and the living do, and that the ridge we hunted on was held by living men who were alive, because I'd made the choice I'd made, and that there is a kind of courage that looks like cowardice from the outside, and you can only know the difference if you're willing to wait and see what it protected. I was going to say all of that. And then I heard footsteps behind me. I did not turn around. I knew the footsteps. In 7 weeks you learn the way a person moves, the particular rhythm and weight of it. Hers was unhurried. She set her feet like she was used to uneven ground. She came around to my right side and stood there. Just stood there with her arms at her sides and looked at the council. Nobody spoke. The surprise of it was total. "I'll ask your pardon," she said. Her voice was level. She wasn't performing calm. She was calm. "I know this isn't my place. I know it isn't my council and it isn't my business and there aren't words in English for what I'm breaking right now, probably. But I've been in this camp 7 weeks and I've been watching, and there's something I need to say." Red Crow looked at me. There was a question in his eyes. I nodded barely, and he stayed still, which was the closest this was going to come to permission. 4 days after I came here, me said, one of my horse's shoes came loose and your blacksmith, the older man, the one with the scar on his chin, he reset it, and he charged me nothing and turned down what I offered. Twice. 3 days after that it snowed and I woke up and there was wood inside the lodge I was sleeping in, stacked by the door, and nobody had asked me anything about it. A week ago there was a boy, maybe 12 years old, who fell through the ice on the creek. I saw it happen. I started running and your chief got there first. She paused. He lay down flat on the ice. Belly down, arms out, talking to that boy the whole time, slow and easy, until the boy could grab his arms. He didn't make a sound when it happened. He didn't make a sound after. Charging Fox's jaw had tightened. "I'm a white woman from a settlement 3 days east of here," me said. "My husband is 4 months dead and I had nowhere to go and I got lost, and I rode into this camp not knowing what was going to happen to me. And what happened to me was nothing bad. What happened was that people fed me and fixed my horse and kept me warm and nobody asked for anything back." She looked at me for a moment. "He didn't ask for anything back." She turned back to the council. "I don't know what happened 3 years ago with the road. I wasn't there. I can't speak to that. What I can speak to is what I've seen in 7 weeks, which is a man who runs a camp the way a good camp ought to be run, where the old women are warm, where the children are cared for, where a stranger from the wrong people altogether can come in off the plains half frozen and be treated like a person." She stopped. "I don't know if that counts for anything here. I think it should." The silence that followed was the longest kind. Not uncomfortable exactly, more like the silence after a bell has rung and you're waiting for the sound to finish moving through the air. Charging Fox was looking at me. Something had shifted in his face. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't forgiveness. But whatever it had been before, that cold certainty had cracked a little at the corner. Red Crow was looking at me. Then he looked at me. I looked back at him, steady, my hands in my lap still. I need to tell you what it did to me, her standing there. Because I'm going to tell this whole thing, and I'm going to try to tell it straight, and if I don't tell you that part, I'll have left out the heart of it. I had been chief for 11 years, and for most of that time I had been doing it alone. Morning Star Woman had helped me more than I ever told her, had been the place I went when I needed to think out loud, had been the one who asked the question that got me to the answer. When she died, 3 winters before me, Doyle rode into my camp. I thought, that's it then. That's the last person who knows what this actually costs. The last person who sees the man behind the chief and thinks he's worth seeing. You can be surrounded by people and be alone in that way. I was. And here was this woman, this white widow from Harker's Mill with cracked hands and a rifle she could barely aim, standing on her feet in front of my council and saying, in plain flat words, what she had seen. Not what she believed about me. What she had actually seen, with her own eyes, from the outside where I had no control over the picture. I am not a man who weeps. I was trained not to be, and I am also, underneath that training, simply not built that way. But something in my chest, some old locked thing, gave slightly, just slightly, like a door that's been stuck for a long time moving a fraction in its frame. I held it, kept my face still, breathed. But I felt it. Red Crow spoke after a while. He addressed me directly, which was not nothing. Red Crow didn't speak to women in council as a rule, and the fact that he broke the rule told me something. He said, "We are grateful for the witness of this woman." And then he said something that surprised me. He said, "A chief who cares for the stranger at the gate and cares for his own people with the same hand is not the same as a chief who cares for nothing." He said he would think on what had been said. He did not call for a vote. Humpback Elk nodded once, which was more than he'd said all day. The brothers from the river band looked at each other. The eldest one said, "We came for one answer, and we will go home with a different one." Not what I asked for, but not nothing. Charging Fox said nothing. He stood up, and this was the thing I have gone back to many times. He looked at me, and then he looked at me, and he nodded at her. A small nod. The kind of nod you give to someone who has said something you didn't want to hear and couldn't argue with. Then he walked out of the clearing. I let him go. Me and I walked back toward camp. The snow had started, small flakes, the first thin scattering of it, the kind that comes before the real snow. The grass was going white at the tips. We walked for a while without talking. I wasn't in a hurry to talk. Sometimes after a thing has happened you need to let it settle before you put words on it, because the first words you reach for are usually the wrong ones. "I'm sorry," she said eventually, "if I made it worse." "You didn't make it worse." "I didn't know if I should." "You shouldn't have," I said. "By the rules of that, you know that." "Yes." "But you did anyway." "Yes." I thought about that for a moment. The snow was thickening slightly. I could hear the camp sounds ahead of us, the dogs, the horses, someone working a hide, the particular low noise of a camp settling toward evening. "Why?" I said. She was quiet long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then she said, "Because nobody was saying the true thing, and I knew the true thing." And I thought, if not me, then who? I looked at her. She was looking straight ahead. Her jaw had that set to it, not hard, just decided. "My husband used to say," she said, "that the hardest part of being right is that it doesn't matter. People believe what they want to believe, and being right about something just means you have to watch them be wrong." "He sounds like he was tired," I said. "He was," a small pause. "He was a good man, he was just tired." We walked. "You're not tired," I said. She turned and looked at me then. The snow was on her hair and on the shoulders of her coat. Her light eyes were steady. "Not yet," she said. She stayed for 3 more weeks after the council. The horse was sound by the end of the first week, but we had gotten a heavy snow and the trail northwest was not passable, which was true, and also, I'll say it plainly, I didn't point out the trail that was still passable, which was to the east and longer but not blocked. I told myself this was because her brother's place was northwest and she was going northwest, and the snow would break. I told myself several things that I mostly believed. Spotted Owl found all of this very entertaining. She told me so through her complicated sign and broken English system, and I told her she was an old woman who didn't know what she was talking about, and she laughed in the way she had that went on about twice as long as most people's laughing. What happened in those 3 weeks was not dramatic. That's the truth of it. It was ordinary, the kind of ordinary that only feels that way from the inside, and from the outside looks like something being built. She helped with the work of the camp. She asked before she helped, and she didn't do it to show anything. She did it because she was a person who needed to be useful. She learned 2 or 3 words a day. She made a fool of herself with the curring hides. She'd never done it, and she grabbed the wrong end of the scraper twice, and Spotted Owl laughed so hard she had to sit down, and she didn't get embarrassed, just fixed her grip and tried again. In the evenings I found reasons to be near where she was. That's all. Nothing was said. I was the chief of my band, and I was not a young man. I was 44 years old, and I knew better than to act like someone who doesn't know what he's feeling. What I was feeling was, here is a person who sees me clearly and is not afraid of what she sees. Here is a person who will stand up inside a situation she didn't make and say the true thing. Here is a person who is not tired yet. I had not felt anything like it in 3 years. Not since Morning Star Woman. I want to be careful with that comparison because me Doyle was nothing like Morning Star Woman. They were built differently, they laughed differently, they moved differently, they thought differently. What they shared was a quality that I don't have a word for in either language exactly. A quality of being present. Of being when you were with them, somewhere rather than nowhere. Most people are somewhere between the two. You're with them, but they're half somewhere else. Morning Star Woman had never been half somewhere else. Neither was me Doyle. On the 16th day after the council, I was at the horse lines in the evening, and she came out and stood near me. Not next to me, a few feet off. She was looking at the horses. "The snow's breaking," she said. "Yes. Trail should be clear in 2-3 days." "Should be." We stood there. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what I'm going to do when I get there to my brother's place." A pause. "I've been thinking about whether I want to." "What else would you do?" "I don't know." She shifted her weight. "That's the thing. I don't know, and I'm not scared of not knowing, that's different. It used to scare me." I looked at her. What changed? She looked back at me, and whatever she was going to say, she seemed to think about the shape of it for a moment, turning it over. "I did," she said, "I think." The horses moved. One of the younger mares was restless, turning in circles, and I went over and put my hand on her neck and spoke to her in a low voice, nothing in particular, just sound, until she stilled. When I came back, Me was watching me. "You're good with them," she said. "I've had time. My husband was afraid of horses." She said it without sadness, just as a fact. He could ride, but he never trusted them. "You can ride and not trust," I said. "It just makes it harder." She smiled, not her almost smile, the real one, which was bigger than you'd expect and went all the way to her eyes. I hadn't seen it many times. It was worth waiting for. "Yes," she said, "that's right, that's exactly right." She came to me on the 18th night. I want to be plain about what that means and what it doesn't mean. She came to the fire outside my lodge and sat down across from me and said, "I want to talk to you about something, and I don't know if it's a foolish thing to say, and I've decided to say it anyway." I said, "All right." She said, "I think I would like to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because I do. My brother would take me in and I'd have a place and a life, and it would be a decent life. I want to stay because of what's here, because of who's here." She didn't say my name. She was looking at me directly, and she didn't need to say my name. I looked at the fire for a while. "You know what this would mean," I said. "I've been thinking about that for 2 weeks. The people here would take it some ways, and some would be harder to live with than others." "I know. Your people would." "I don't have people right now," she said. "I have a brother 3 days northwest, that's it, and I'm not looking at you and thinking about my people." I looked at her. She held it, didn't look away, just sat there across the fire with the snow on the ground behind her going blue in the last light, steady, waiting. "You stood up in that council," I said. "For a man you'd known 7 weeks, for a thing that wasn't yours." "I stood up for the true thing. It was also me." She held my eyes. "Yes," she said, "it was also you." The fire snapped. An ember fell and went dark in the snow at the edge of the ring. I said, "You would have to live the life of this camp, not partly, not when it's convenient." She said, "I know." I said, "There are men here who will not be easy about this." She said, "I've dealt with men who weren't easy." I said, "If you stay here and something becomes of this, I'm asking you not to leave. Not for a difficulty, not for a hard season or a hard year, because I can't," and I was going to say something else, something more finished, but the true version was simpler. I said, "I can't do this if I'm waiting for you to leave." And she said, "I'm not going anywhere, Tall Cedar." First time she'd used my name, just like that plain first time. I got up and walked around the fire and sat down beside her, and we stayed there for a while in the cold, near enough that I could feel the warmth coming off her, looking at the fire. Her shoulder was against mine. That was all. That was enough for that night. We were married in early spring, when the ground had thawed and the creek was running again. The ceremony was ours, Lakota, real, the correct one, with the blanket and the words and the witnesses, and Spotted Owl weeping shamelessly the entire time, and swearing to anyone who would listen that she had known from the first week. I stood in front of my people with this woman beside me, this white widow from Harker's Mill, with her cracked hands and her steady eyes and her one real smile that was worth waiting for. And I felt something that I am going to try to name because it deserves to be named. I felt like myself. That's all. I felt, standing there, that I was exactly the person I actually was, seen clearly and chosen deliberately by someone who had walked through the hard version of my life with her eyes open and decided, "This is where I'll stand." After Morning Star Woman, I had thought that part of my life was over. I hadn't been bitter about it. You don't always get bitterness. Sometimes you just get the fact of a thing, cold and final, and you carry it. I had carried it. I had been the chief, and I had made the decisions, and I had held the band through 2 hard winters, and a bad epidemic that took 11 people in 3 weeks, and I had done all of it without anyone standing beside me who knew the weight of it. I hadn't let myself think about that. And then this woman stood up in front of my council and said the true thing, just said it, because nobody else was going to. Charging Fox came to me 2 weeks after the wedding. He came in the early morning, before the camp was fully awake, and he sat down across from me without ceremony. He was quiet for a long time. I let him be quiet. "My father," he said finally. "Yes. I have been angry. Yes. I don't know if I was wrong," he said, "about what he deserved. About what we deserved." "You weren't wrong about that," I said. "What you were wrong about was thinking that I didn't know the cost." He looked at me. "I know what it cost," I said. "I'm the one who counted it. I'm the one who knows every name of every man we would have lost if we'd fought, and I carry those names the same way you carry your father's. They're just not visible the same way because they're names of men who didn't die. It's harder to grieve what didn't happen. He was still looking at me, something working in his face. He was a good man, I said. Your father, he was worth grieving. Charging Fox looked down at his hands. The woman, he said after a while, your wife. Yes. She said the true thing, he said, in the council. She did. He nodded slowly. She isn't what I expected, he said. No, I said, she isn't what I expected either. He almost smiled, the ghost of one, and then he said something that I have held onto since, that I will hold onto for the rest of my life probably. He said, my mother said to me last night, she said, your uncle has always led us well and you have always made it hard for him. She said, maybe now he has someone to make it easy, a little, sometimes. He looked up. I think my mother is right, he said. I didn't say anything. My throat had done something complicated. Charging Fox stood up. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder, just for a moment, just a touch, and then he walked away. I sat there for a while. The camp was starting to move around me. I could hear Me's voice somewhere behind the lodge, talking to Spotted Owl, the two of them in their system of signs and borrowed words, and Spotted Owl laughing, and I sat with the morning cold on my face and the sound of the people I was responsible for starting their day. I want to tell you one more thing, one last thing. There is a moment that I go back to, not the council, not when she stood up and spoke, before that. The day the boy went through the ice. I was coming back from checking the trap lines alone, and I heard the cracking sound and then the boy's voice, high and sudden, and I ran. When I got to the creek, he was in up to his chest, grabbing for the ice at the edge and breaking it every time. I didn't stop to think about it. I lay down on my belly and reached. It took a while. The boy was scared and kept grabbing wrong, and the ice under me was not good ice, and I knew it, and I kept talking anyway, slow, easy, the same words over and over until he got hold of my wrists and I pulled. We both got wet, but he didn't go under. I didn't think about it afterward. I'd have done it for any child. I'd have done it if no one was watching. That's just what you do. But Me was watching. She had seen it from 60 yards off, running, and she'd arrived just after it was done, and she'd stood there on the bank while the boy coughed and shook and I got to my feet, and she'd looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as recognition, like she was confirming something she'd already suspected. She didn't say anything. The boy's mother had arrived by then, and there was noise and commotion, and I went back to my lodge and changed my wet clothes and thought no more about it. But she had stored it. She stored it and she carried it into that council clearing, and she put it down in front of the men who were deciding whether I was worth keeping. Not as a dramatic thing, not as a performance, just as what she had seen with her own eyes of who I was when no one was making me perform it. That is the thing. That is the thing I didn't know I needed and didn't know I was going to get. Not to be loved in a soft way. I'd had that and it was good, and I'd lost it and I'd survived. What I needed, what I had not had in a long time, was to be seen. Clearly, without a story put on top of it. Seen the way you see a good piece of land. Here is what it is, here is what it can hold, here is what it has survived, and it's worth something. It's worth more than what people have been saying it's worth. She saw that. She came and stood beside me and said it out loud, in front of the people I'd been leading for 11 years, and she was right, and they knew she was right, and it changed something. Not everything. Charging Fox still had his grief. Red Crow still had his doubts. The world was still the world, which is a hard and complicated place where no one gets to stay chief forever, and the road through the Eastern Valley still ran where it ran, and 11 people were still dead from the epidemic 3 winters back. But something changed. I am 61 years old now. I have been chief of my band for 28 years. Me has been beside me for 17 of them. She is gray at the temples and her hands are more cracked than they were. She's worked the life of this camp for 17 years, and the work has marked her the same way it marks all of us. She learned the language well. She learned the ceremonies. She learned which roots the women use for fever and how to read the coming weather in the way the horses hold their heads. She has buried 3 children and raised 2, and she has stood beside me at councils that were harder than the one she walked into, and she has never, not once, done the thing I was afraid of, the thing I asked her not to do. She has never left. Last winter we had a bad cold that settled in my chest, and for a week I wasn't sure which way it was going to go. I wasn't afraid of it exactly. I am old enough that the idea of dying has lost most of its power to scare me. But I was lying in the lodge one night, breathing wrong, and she came in and sat beside me and took my hand. Just held it. Didn't say anything. Didn't tell me it was going to be all right. Didn't need to. And I thought, this is it. This is the thing. Not the council, not the words she said, not even the wedding in the early spring with Spotted Owl weeping. This. A woman sitting beside you in the cold, holding your hand, because you are the man she chose to be beside, and the choosing was real, and she has held to it through everything that has come since. I got better. The cold broke in a week and I got up and went back to work. But I remember that night. I will remember it. Outside, the snow was coming down quiet and the camp was still, and somewhere far off a horse made a sound and was quiet again. Her hand in mine, warm, real. Here is a man, you could say. Here is a man, and here is the woman who looked at him clearly and decided he was worth the standing beside. That's all I wanted. 30 years of leading and deciding and carrying what couldn't be put down, that's all I ever wanted. To be seen right and stood beside. She gave me that. She gave me that, and I have been living in the shelter of it ever since.